Animals make sounds for a lot of different reasons. For example, bats use echolocation pulses, most of which we can't actually hear ourselves due to our weak human ears, while other species sing or issue warning calls. There are all sorts of different reasons. A lot of animals even make sounds just moving around their environment, such as flying insects. Now, if you're at all familiar with ecology, you're probably at least vaguely aware that bats are often monitored primarily via sound. In the recent past, this was actually quite expensive. So a recorder for bats could cost upwards of 800 euros, even 1,000 euros in some cases. Monitoring also generated an enormous amount of data, which was very difficult for human beings to sift through. For example, in a study I did in northern Germany a couple of years ago, I generated 3 terabytes of data, 2.5 million files, which clearly checking all of those files one at a time simply isn't practical. But fortunately, there's a new type of recorder called the Audiomoth. Instead of 1,000 euros, it costs 80. In addition, more automatic classifiers based on machine learning technology are helping us to reduce the workload to a manageable level. So instead of having to manually inspect 2.5 million files, you can run the machine on those files and it will say you have species X, Y, and Z in file 100, 600, and 1032. The machine is often wrong, but we'll get into that later. So when planning a study, you need to ask yourself 3 core questions. What do you want to record? Where are you going to be recording? And when will you be recording? All of these 3 sound obvious, but they're not as simple as you might expect. When you're thinking about what you want to record, this really informs every other decision you're going to make in the study. For example, what type of hardware you're going to be using and how you program that hardware. Now, here I have a recording of this here bush cricket, Tetagonia viridissima, also known as the great green bush cricket or the Gruner's Hoytford. Hopefully you can all hear this. There's another one in that recording as well. Whereas this little guy down here, his echolocations are much, much higher frequency. Human beings can't hear them. So if you only care about birds and insects, you don't have to set your recorders to such a high frequency. Whereas if you only care about bats, you can have them set so it only records frequencies above a certain level. So you end up with a few thousand files instead of 2.5 million. Obviously, your choice of species also determines when you're recording, which we'll go into in more detail later. And it also determines where you put your recorders. The determination of what you want to record is complicated because it isn't just necessarily the main species groups I've talked about. Like historically, it's been bats, then birds was added to that list, and now there's increasing interest in insects. But we know that a lot of other animals make species-specific sounds as well. Shrews, voles, rodents, terrestrial mammals, and frogs. In the neotropics, there's a lot of interests in primate acoustics. Howler monkeys are the obvious example. They can be heard and identified from obscene distances away. Even in the water, whales, dolphins, their acoustics is now being used for monitoring by ocean specialists. Underwater beetles in freshwater ponds, the list goes on. What you're recording doesn't even have to be alive or a wild animal. In Indonesia, people have been monitoring poachers by training classifiers for gunshots or human interference by looking for the noises of cars, the barking of dogs. The point that I need to make is whatever you're studying, whatever you're researching, you need to tailor your study around your species groups, and you should understand those species groups before you start. You don't want to go charging in going, yes, I'm going to study insects or small mammals, and then find, okay, it's 6 months later and I recorded at the wrong time of year, or the data doesn't exist for me to actually validate my own recordings. An especially important one is the presence of confusion species. Sometimes it's literally not possible to tell between sounds of two species in a group. The classic example is in bats, there's a genus called Myotis, where a lot of the time it's very difficult, even impossible, to say which species it is. What's extra frustrating is a classifier will often give you a species-specific prediction. And those of us who love bats will look at it and go, Myotis? Yes. That Myotis? Probably, maybe, but we don't know. And you have to go and then look in the field yourself. Leading on to the next question is where you'll be recording. Because sound travels differently in open habitats compared to cluttered habitats. And the quality of your recordings will vary a lot based on how much background noise there is. For example, I'm collaborating with some researchers in Gothenburg, Sweden. And it was a bit of a nightmare getting good recordings from a dense urban environment. Same for middle of London. By contrast, you can have nice open habitats with very little wind, which is another big background noise, where the sound will just travel and travel, and you can tell what species you're listening to from quite a distance. Another thing we'll touch on is whether your habitat and study area is simple or quite heterogeneous. If you've got lots of interesting microhabitats, like ponds, small clusters of a special flower, it makes sense to put recorders near to them as well, because they'll be home to unique species. A lot of these will be quite quiet because they're communicating with other members of their species within that microhabitat. So it's not so simple. At least some idea of what's living or active in your target habitat is good as well, so you know roughly what to expect. It's good to keep an open mind about what might be there, but at the same time, when you're using classifiers and it gives you a result like, yes, this is M. Schreiber's eye bat, a bat expert can say, interesting because we're 600 kilometers north of its current distribution. I should also mention that when you're in a high background noise environment or a cluttered environment, you can work around it a little bit by changing the gain settings on your device. How sound travels depends a little bit on frequency. So what we have here is two recordings. I made at the same study site at the exact same time, containing two species. At around 50 kilohertz, you can just barely see it in the top image. We have a high frequency ultrasonic Orthoptera called Conocephalus dorsalis. And at 20 kilohertz, we have another one, super common, called Rosalie. This recorder on the bottom image was 25 meters away, approximately. You can see it's a lot easier to see the Conocephalus dorsalis and a little bit harder to see the Rosaliana Rosalie. That's because high frequency sound basically degrades faster than low frequency sound. So yes, you need to think about what you're recording, how cluttered your environment is, simply because the high frequency stuff, you might need more recorders. You might need to position them differently. You might need to make them more sensitive. There's no one size fits all rule. Some species and microhabitats are just a pain in the neck. Like when I was telling you about ponds and microhabitats earlier, the main obstacle for that are species like this, Stephophima grossum. You can just about see on the spectrogram down here, the visual representation of sound. These little lines at around 10.2, 11.5, etc., those are the click sounds of its song. If this recorder had been positioned 10 meters further away, it would not have reliably detected this species. So match your recorders to the microhabitats of what you're recording. Finally, and I know this will seem pretty obvious, but it's also not as simple as you expect, is when you'll be recording. A lot of species are only active at night, others only active during the day, or even at certain temperatures. The time of year is also a big problem. For example, this here mole cricket, in my first attempt at bioacoustics, I missed it because it only sings in May to early June. And my recorders went out at the end of June. Sometimes it actually pays to record when fewer species are singing. I'm sure the ornithologists in the audience will know that sometimes when you're listening to a dawn chorus or an evening chorus and record different times of day, different times of year, not just at peak times. This is especially true when you're trying to run a classifier. I've seen the main bird classifier called Bennett have an absolute meltdown trying to get good species predictions from a dawn chorus recording. So during this tutorial, I'll be talking a lot about Audiomoths. They're 80 euros per unit, and they can record anything imaginable. So from, I think 4 hertz is the lowest, which is infrasound, right up to 190 kilohertz effectively, because they can sample at 380 kilohertz. A lot of other devices do exist. The big ones are the Batlogger series, the Anibat, and the Wildlife Acoustics song meters. They are higher quality. They have nicer microphones. They don't die in rain, for example, but at a much higher price. So it's a trade-off. With Audiomoths, you can sample far more sites, far more microhabitats. They just die more frequently, which is a bit inconvenient. Before we go into more details, I should point out some obvious limitations. You can only detect species which emit sound with this method. So I've talked a lot about Orthoptera. Not all grasshoppers and bush crickets emit sound. There are entire families which are completely silent. Some species, grasshoppers, bats, even birds, you can't reliably say it's a specific species because they might make identical songs. Even with classifiers, I also don't want anyone to think these studies are easy. It's an enormous amount of work. We're all ecologists and wildlife enthusiasts, so we're willing to put in that work. Just don't expect to go click, yay, result. It doesn't work that way. Especially as you leave Europe and North America, not all species have good reference data. This is especially a major problem in the neotropics, Africa, and Asia as well. We might have a perfectly good recording of a species, but have no idea what it is because there's no reference data for species in that region. Classifiers can also only be built up and be useful for species if the expertise exists to build those classifiers. So new software exists which lets us build our own classifiers, but that's not easy in itself. I spent 2 years of my life and a huge amount of spinal cartilage building a classifier for grasshoppers in Germany. If you wanted to build one for, say, South America, it would take years simply because it doesn't exist yet. And even when a classifier does exist, it can give misleading or unreliable results. Like we call these classifiers AIs, artificial intelligence, but they're not really. They're looking for patterns in the data and they can be deceived. And I've seen some breathtakingly insane predictions, even from the best classifier. So you need to validate those predictions, not just trust them blindly. When you're training your own classifier or validating them, like if anyone wants reference recordings for grasshoppers, you can either go on Xenocanto, Berlin Tierstimmen Archive. You can use these to learn the species groups you're going to be working with. So you can find many recordings for grasshoppers, birds, bats. They're also adding new groups like frogs, small mammals as well. You can also train yourself a little bit, and I'd recommend this. It's actually quite enjoyable, is go to where you know certain species are with your recorders, with your binoculars. And if you see a species, you can watch it for a while and listen to it so you can learn. Recently, for example, I was collaborating with some friends in Spain, and we came across this beautiful little grasshopper here, Cortipus jucundicus. And we were able to make recordings after finding it in the wild simply because there were 2 sound recordings made for this species because it's that rare. It was like the second best moment of my life. This recording is one of the ones I used to build up my classifier. It's from a site I had in Schleswig-Holstein. And it's home to several species of grasshopper. So I built up the classifier, and this is how I trained it up. So I'd label each and every sound event 10,000 times. I had 10,000 files in the final classifier. Once you've actually got recordings, there's a lot of different softwares you can use. There's a software called Raven Light, which lets you see and analyze any sound file you want. So this was made by Audiomoths. It writes the time and date automatically, and I've added the place and species. And it gives you two different ways of visualizing the sound. So we can see the sound intensity, and we can also see the frequency. This software is really amazing because it lets you zoom in and isolate specific sounds. So if you remember what I was telling you about from the dawn choruses earlier, you can isolate a specific area and just play that specific part of the sound file. It also helps you filter out all the background noise junk that you get, like vegetation, rustling, cars. It even, amazingly, lets you hear ultrasound, the sounds of bats. Because what you can do is isolate the high frequency sounds that you can't hear and then slow them down. It stretches the sound so that we can hear it. It's absolutely incredible. This software can be used to build up your own classifiers, or just for data validation, or just for the joy that is hearing all these species communicating. BirdNet Analyzer. It's the most user-friendly classifier software there is because there's no coding required and you can tailor it to your location and recording time. The downside is that at least in Europe, it only does birds. So you can either give it a single file or you can give it an entire folder or folders of many thousands of files, and it will analyze all of them one at a time and give you a table of results. You can also tell it where you've been recording, so it will modify the species list it's classifying. So you only get birds from Brandenburg, only birds from Southwest England. Wherever you're studying, you can tell it where it is. You can also say what time of year it is, because not all birds sing at all times of year, and their songs can change during the year as well. The downside is not all bird species are in this classifier. If you're in Indonesia, for example, you're going to have a very hard time of it. Birds might be the best researched species group in all of wildlife, but there's still a long way for us to go. Now, when you've run the classifier, you'll have an output of many different tables with a series of confidence scores. And for every 3-second snippet of your recordings, it will make a prediction. While we're waiting, I can show you one of the bat classifiers. There are two ones I really love. One is called Bat Detect, which requires you to use Python. But if you're a beginner, you can save yourself a lot of stress by using one called Batscope 4. It works in much the same way. It scans each sound file looking for bats. Weirdly, this one has European bats, North American bats, and even Latin America. The downside is that this software is quite slow. Batscope is free software, and so is Bat Detect 2. You don't even have to register. When you've run BirdNet or Batscope, you'll end up with a lot of CSV outputs. A lot of the times, those outputs are empty if it hasn't identified anything. If it has identified something, you will get a species output where it gives you a confidence score. What you'll end up with is a start time, an end time, and a confidence score. That's just one that I've made up. That's exactly how it will work in real life. Sometimes you'll have multiple predictions in a single file. So you might have Gallinago. The machine is 90% certain that a sound file will be Vanellus vanellus, otherwise known as the Northern Lapwing or the key bits in general. Just because it's 90% confidence doesn't mean it's accurate. So go to your folder, find the file, and listen to it in Raven. And only if you, the human, the ornithologist, agree that it is the key bits, do you say, okay, this species was present at this site at this time. Each CSV returns to a whole sound file, and you'll have several rows within that sound file. So for example, if I had a 12-second long sound file, I might get two predictions, one from 0 to 3, one from 6 to 9, etc. I should also mention that BirdNet can give you selection tables, and you can load these in Raven, and it will appear over the sound file telling you where and what it thinks is singing. For a confidence threshold, I normally use 0.8. 0.1 is very conservative, but it does pretty much guarantee you'll get everything. We all know it's a problem. It's been mentioned in every paper, but no one has quantified it or tried to solve it yet. These two links here are for the classifier I've built for Orthoptera and the Anaconda software to run it. I've built a step-by-step tutorial so that you too might learn the joy that is grasshoppers. This is also where you'll get the Audiomoth software to program your Audiomoths. And that will be the last software I'll show you. These links here have huge libraries of sound files you can use for learning what these species actually sound like. So the first one is to set it to local time. And then we have something called the sampling rate. The key to remember here is your sample rate needs to be double the maximum frequency of what you want to record. So humans can hear up to 20 kilohertz on average, which reduces with age. I think the highest frequency species of anything in Europe is the lesser horseshoe bat, Rhinolophus hipposideris, which echolocates up to 110 kilohertz. In other words, you need to hear up to 125 kilohertz, and you set it to 250. That does use a hellacious amount of storage and power, but Physics has no mercy. Depending on what device you're using, you can also modify your gain. So I generally go for medium gain, but if you're in a very quiet environment, looking for a very quiet species, which might be at a distance, you can use high gain or low gain if you don't want so much. One thing to think about is your recording duration. I generally use 1 minute long recordings just because it's convenient and it's long enough to get entire songs reliably. And it also means that it's broken up naturally for building classifiers. Some people prefer to have massive recordings of 1 hour or recordings that are just 12 seconds long. With most devices, including Audiomoth, you can schedule them. So, for example, 12, 18. So you can tailor when you're recording around your species. Finally, you can also do parsing, like I told you before. So if you don't want all that background noise, if you want to only record things below a certain frequency, you can. Or above a certain frequency if you only care about bats, certain species of bat, and you can bandpass. So, for example, let's say, okay, I don't care about background noise, and I do care about everything up to 50 kilohertz. Regional data sets is an inevitable approach, as is training our own classifiers to look at regional species. That's actually something we're doing here in Brandenburg. We're building up a small classifier for 3 bird species, looking at different behaviors. It really depends on the probability of the species localization. And on a practical note, it also depends on your battery and SD card size and how often you can record it.